is the retaliation to hurt as they did to others. However, as times go by, it has been changed. So the rehabilitation is the basic idea, basic ultimate goal on them. So what we should say is that because of this time, we should consider the effect of the rehabilitation first. So considering that by having the bondage in not only economically, just giving them the job is not the whole answer to those prisoners turning back to our society and are successfully rehabilitated, but rather also giving them the opportunity to connection also in the political issue. In that area, it's most important to make a high possibility of they having successful rehabilitation on that. Then the second thing we want to say that is that then what if the rehabilitation does not work enough? What would happen? What the severe harm it would bring? The thing is that because these criminals and these prisoners experience in their prison that they are excluded our society, and also simultaneously impose that you should be limited on your basic civil right, then should that rather you should be outforced and you are outside in society. So because of that experience, they feel that they think the society is also against still the object of the hatred. And secondly, they don't know what exactly what can do by the casting of vote can bring the beneficial into our society as they want. Because of that, the result is the recidivism that happen. In other words, they would commit a crime again and again in other way or much more severe way. It means the failure of the rehabilitation rather make our society much more terrible and destabilized as the opening opposition concerned. So we believe that because of that we should pass this motion. And moving on to second argument. No, sir. The consequences it will bring the prisoners. So firstly, we should recognize the prisoners also having the basic human rights, and also they are separated from society, but still in there, but still they are the group of the people having the collective right, and also having the right to advocate their own the benefits in themselves. So what they can do is even though they are separated from the other people, but still they are a group of the member of the people in our society. So what they should do is also casting a vote, also making their voices, not just by the other family members or friends, but by themselves. But the second thing is the affiliation with the society, because they also has been, and still the member of society, they know the other of the people they know, like adore, like the families or their friends. In that basis, we want to say that casting a vote is not just only for self-interest, but instead of that, they also still can represent other people's idea, and if they want to have the incentive to make the better society, not only for themselves, even though they are still now even in the prison, but still they want to make a better society to other peoples. In that case, they also should have the right to cast a vote. Like for the family, also their friends, and the kids, they want to make the better society, then they should have the right to cast a vote to help them living in that kind of the positive society. So because of that, the reason is simple. They should be rehabilitated in a better way, not only by economically, but also still politically. And by doing so, they'll have the stronger bondage in a society. So based on that, I'm proud to propose.
The speaker has spoken for 7 minutes and 31 seconds.
Thank the speaker for his speech. Next, we invite the member of the opposition to open the logo.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Voting rights can only be granted in case individuals abide by the basis rules in the democratic society. If they don't take responsibility, it's futile for them to give a right, in particular voting right, which is very significant in the democratic society. So today, as a side of opposition and closing bench, we would like to more focusing on the fundamental points step by step, why we cannot give a voting right to the prisoners. Before we go to my substantial points and extensions, I'd like to briefly rebut against the side of government. The side of government told us today, because they have a right and they're human being, we have to give a very fundamental right. No, unless they take their responsibility, we don't have any legitimacy to give this right to that prisoners. And secondly, they also talked about because they are a small number of people, we don't really, no thank you, we don't really care whether or not actually give an influence. No, we don't think so. We have enough prisoners in the society who can actually influence as a matter of vote. And third, no thank you. Third rebuttal is regarding the rehabilitation from the side of closing bans. I have two responsibilities. Firstly, prisoners who are disqualified as a component of society, we don't see they have a right to fulfill and lead. No, thank you. Grant and cast a vote in the society, which is actually influence a lot. And secondly, they have to prove us what exact mechanism can actually how granting a voting right is linking to the rehabilitation itself. Okay, that was my rebuttal. Yes.
Prove us what kind of the harm they can bring the prison.
Okay, I'm gonna show you what kinds of harm they can actually influence on the society in my second extension. Okay, firstly, the extension is why prisoners are not sufficient voters. I have two levels of analysis, what a vote is, and second analysis is who are prisoners. Vote itself is the pivotal way to choose a leader in the democratic society. So presidents and statesmen to be a leader of group through the vote. Vote and that position itself cannot be achieved and bought by money or whatsoever any ways aside from the voting. That's the point. Due to this significance, voting should be conducted by mature civilians. Now, who are the mature civilians? We say that firstly, they have to comprehend the democratic society. No, thank you. Second of all, they have to adapt the society. And third of all, they have to abide by the law of the society. Because that's very fundamental things. Then who is the prisoner? We see that the one that actually cannot fulfill these conditions. Who are the prisoners? This is the second level of analysis. Because the side of government, the opening bench include all the kinds of prisoners, we see that they are the one who commit hideous crimes and violating law, which result in problem in the society, meaning that they are not mature civilians in terms of democratic society. No, thank you. The one that don't abide by the law at the society, meaning that they who are not fulfill their duty and obligation as a component of society. Thus, therefore, we see that we don't think granting a vote right to the prisoners is necessary. That's the point of my first extension. Yes.
Right. Basically, even if a prisoner goes to prison, your property right is granted. You have a right to vote. Why not?
No, we don't think so. That's only happening as long as they fulfill and take a responsibility in the society. That's our stance and that's our point. Okay, let's take a look at the second extension, which is very important, the harm itself. The reason why they are prisoner is they simply disregard the system of the democratic society by violating law. Because they don't abide by these basic rules of democratic society, we see that there's a high possibilities that they don't really care what the turnout is, which means whoever the candidates are picked, they don't really care. In particular, no thank you, in particular, if they have to be in prison for long years, such as 30 and 40 years, that's not really their business. So they don't really care what the turnout is. We're gonna actually be a state person. No, thank you. Plus, because the number of prisoners in their society a lot, we see that it can influence on the turnout of voting. That's quite significant. So we see that these inappropriate representatives deteriorate the society as a whole, since they influence a lot in the society. Why? The arbitrarily picked, no thank you, representatives cannot fulfill their job because that's not only dependent on the individuals in the society, but it also includes the opinion of the prisoners. But we think that's inappropriate. So this randomly and arbitrarily picked, no thank you, arbitrarily picked prisoners can have a bad influence on the society as a whole. Okay, here's the thing: the very point from the side of opposition, as long as they can fulfill their responsibility, it's okay to give a right. But the thing is, because the importance of voting right, the attributes of rights and the attributes of the prisoners, we don't think it's okay to give a very significant right to the prisoners. That's the opinion of side of opposition. So we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
The speaker has spoken for 6 minutes and 25 seconds.
We thank the speaker for his speech. Next, we invite the government whip to close the government.
Madam Chair, we've seen opening house talking about the principles of democracy. We wanted to extend this debate into talking about real consequences of what this policy or proposal will bring for society on two levels. Number one, what is the issue of rehabilitation really is in today's society? Number two, is the influence, which all of us agree to happen, positive or negative in our society? So, I'm going to analyze this debate into three main issues. Number one, the nature of democracy, or the principles that opening house really dealt with. Number two, the issue of rehabilitation, and finally on the issue of the consequences and the representation of the prisoners as a collective group existent within our society. So firstly on this issue about the nature of democracy. This House, especially opening opposition, wanted to say that because these prisoners have threatened social system, they should not be allowed to influence social system. We don't think so. Firstly, my opening government told you already that the nature of democracy and the citizenship does not dismiss even when you breach social contract to a minimal part. But moreover, we say that if that was the case, why do you give food to prisoners? Why do you give other rights to Nagasu, for instance, within prison, right? We think that this debate is about drawing line, and we say voting right is out of that line that should be restricted. We say that when you send somebody to prison, it's not to concede that they don't deserve a citizenship, that they don't deserve any form of right, just to concede that they're a social threat under the status quo so that they should be segregated from society. And we think voting right has nothing to do with that specific part. But what closing government told you further was that you need to think about the reasons as to why sometimes people breach laws and social contracts. We gave you the reason. In order to influence the society and precisely to change the society. That is the concept of civil disobedience, when you intentionally violate the law in order to change the social system. For instance, a prominent writer within Korea, Hwang Seok-young, actually did illegal actions and went to North Korea several times in order to represent his voice within the politics in somewhat extreme way. We say that those people, even when they're in prison, should be able to voice their opinions, should be able to be represented within their political ideology. Therefore, in our first clash about the nature of democracy, clearly prisoners deserve voting rights. Moving on to the most important part, regarding rehabilitation and the consequences. So, our open government told you why the principle of rehabilitation can be linked to the issue of voting, and how allowing voting will contribute to prisoners' rehabilitation by issue linkage, by giving them perception that they're the members of society and they belong to a unity called society. What we've told you further was that this rehabilitation is important in terms of making consequences. We told you two things. Number one, that the principal meaning of punishment as progression within society changed from retaliation to rehabilitation, and that becomes the intrinsic value of punishment to begin with. But more importantly, we talked to you about how rehabilitation directly affects recidivism rate and the reoccurrence of crime. We say that the critical interest of the state is on the rehabilitation itself because of this recidivism. We've seen, as they agree, that we see reskilling and upskilling procedure within prison despite the fact that they have been like ex-offenders, after they get released, they get reformed and they have higher chance to be rehabilitated and that have jobs, for instance. We see psychologists referencing system to inform the employers that they have been totally reformed. We see rehabilitation in forms of economic aspect, as they concede. And we're going to expand that to political aspect and giving them perception as to how they are still members of society and that you still deserve your citizenship. We told you how this is critical in terms of how it prevents recidivism, because your critical interest as to why you do not commit crime and to resort to criminal path again is this feeling that you don't want to hurt somebody that you really love. And if society explicitly say, because you have breached the social contract, you don't deserve citizenship and you don't deserve to be our citizen anymore, we said that precisely shows how those people are becoming social outcasts and how those people will resort to recidivism more. Disprove it.
Yeah, even if you pick up president by your hand, if society haven't and never accept you as a citizen, how can you be able to discuss? Because you never ever respond our point about people hate the people.
That was the point that I was going to mention in my third class, and that's a very impatient friend. So moving on to the issue of consequences and results of this proposal, whether it be bad influence or positive influence, as Nancy Young is so desperate to begin with. So basically, this side of the house wants to say that it's bad influence regarding really tell me why that influence is bad and how those people and the society will be negatively affected with prisoners' swing votes. We say, first of all, that that was not the case because there's no policy coming from right-minded politicians that would harm the society. Therefore, when prisoners vote, they wouldn't be able to vote a policy that will harm society to begin with. But secondly, we say that the representation doesn't really happen in that case. They talk about two things. Number one, friends and family representing these prisoners. Number two, Constitution guaranteeing human rights. Firstly, on this issue of friends and family, we say that this is a clear contradiction, as our member said. If friends and family are allowed to represent their ideology and their opinion by voting, why not prisoners themselves? But moreover, if prisoners' voting and ideology is so dangerous and threatening to our society, then according to that logic, you should also be able to restrict the voting rights of your friends and family because that would also have the same effect within the politics. Then they talk about Constitution. We say that Constitution is not flexible in referring to specific policies. So for instance, Constitution does not make you be able to choose a free lunch policy, for instance, to guarantee your kid's rights when a parent is in prison and your kid is in high school, for instance, right? So we think the Constitution is not flexible enough for them to do so. But we say on the closing half of this debate that influence and consequences are positive for two reasons. Number one, it guarantees the collective right of prisoners because you need to acknowledge these prisoners as an existent member within our society. Now, member of opposition said in his extension that they're not components of society. We think this mindset precisely leads to recidivism rate being higher, and this precisely shows how they're not being non-democratic in not guaranteeing the collective right of prisoners. We think that prisoners have the full right and obligation to vote for a policy, like for instance, if there's a politician who wants to increase the living standard within prison, right? They have the right to vote for that politician. But moreover, we told you in their second reason how prisoners not only want to vote for themselves, but also other affiliation within our society. The desperacy coming from NC Young saying that differentiating ex-offenders from current offenders was that once you are done with the prison, ex-offenders are still members of society again. We say that this was a differentiation saying that when you're in prison, policies do not affect you. We don't think that is the case because when you are parents who have a high school kid who cannot vote, who are so willing to go for free lunch policy of Democratic Party, parents should be able to vote for that policy and represent that affiliation that you have with outer society and within the society members. So because we proved to you how rehabilitation leads to severe consequences and how there are consequences of these swing votes are positive, we're proud to win this debate.
The speaker has spoken for 7 minutes and 34 seconds.
We take the speaker for a speech. We last invite the opposition whip to close the debate.
gentlemen, before I go into rebutting to what the previous speaker mentioned and point out today's clashes, I first point out an important thing. For a successful debate, what the government team had to do was they need to prove why prisoners still have the right to vote, and by proving that they still have the ability as voters. As we continued explaining, they ignored how significant a voting process is, which the opposition team significantly proved to you. Now let me go on to the rebuttal of the previous speaker. He came up here and gave us an extreme example of Hwang Seok-yeong. However, since the government team themselves made the definition as all prisoners, regardless of what kind of crimes they made, this case is extreme. Not all prisoners are in the prison because of the result of trying to voice their opinions. Therefore, there is inconsistency in the government side. And he also talked about the policies that can hurt. However, we are not saying that that criminals will vote for policies that can harm the society. Instead, we're saying that they will vote for policies that are less adapt to the current social system itself, that are less insufficient for the social system, the development of it, because they are not in the society currently, and more for the reasons that we explained on the opposition team. Also, he talked about the right of the prisoners to guarantee other people's rights, especially, for example, children. Then we want to ask the government, the prisoners themselves are in the prisons because they hit a crime. If they care so much about the children, why didn't they think about the children's right or the influence that they will have once they end up in prisons before going there? Because they did harm and because they lacked the ability, we believe that they do not have the right to vote. And lastly, he also talked about collective rights, how policies, for example, they can advocate for policies of increasing the living standards of prison. Ladies and gentlemen, exactly, because they have this collective power, because they are so powerful, the opposition team is saying that they have enough power because the number of prisoners is not 2 or 3. Because of that, they have enough power to wrongly influence the democratic society today. Now let me go on to the 3 clashes of today's debate. The first clash is about fundamental individuals' right is it same as voting right. Second, lack of persons' ability, is it bigger than the right to vote of them or not? Third, weighing the benefit and harm of the result of passing this motion. Let me go on to the first class, which is about fundamental individual rights versus voting right of the prisoners. Yes, before I go on. Sir.
Right, basically, if you meet certain age, regardless of your mental condition, you have right to vote. You don't morally judge whether a person is capable.
Sir, we're not talking about general rights. They are ignoring the motion. We are talking about rights in the case of prisoners. We are not talking about general voters' rights. So let me go on to the first class. The Prime Minister came up here and talked about social contracts, importance of individual rights as long as they don't harm other people's lives. Exactly, because prisoners did harm other people's lives, because they had done crimes in the society, their right is lessened by being put in the prison. And furthermore, their right with relation to voting should not be accepted. And leader of opposition explained to you how this debate is not about fundamental human rights. And the closing furthermore explained the knowledge and understanding of the democratic system needed to vote. Ladies and gentlemen, the important thing that government is neglecting is that this debate is not about fundamental rights of human. Of course, the opposition team strongly believes that every individual have the basic rights. However, we're talking about voting rights. The Deputy Prime Minister said that he himself, sadly, is not influenced by the society or anyone else. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is not true, especially in the case of voting in democratic society. A citizen's decisions to vote is influenced by many factors and by the social system itself. And it is important to have this because of the importance of voting, which I believe that the opposition team significantly proved to you. As we said, voting may not affect prisoners inside the prison, especially prisoners who will stay in the prison for a long time, but voting does affect the society itself. It is directly related to what kind of leaders are elected, what kind of policies are enacted. Therefore, voting is important. They're ignoring the difference between fundamental rights and voting rights. And let me move on to the second clash, lack of prisoners' ability versus right to vote of the prisoners. opening government explained to you. However, they did not prove whether prisoners have the ability. They failed to do that. And the leader of opposition, the opening side, mentioned that because prisoners are exempted from the social system, they don't have ability. Most importantly, the government team today did not prove how prisoners will always go for the better good of the society. They did not prove that. And because they also said every prisoner, including prisoners who did a great harm, like massacre murders or rape murders in the society, because they themselves said that, because I proved in the first class that voting is important. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, they are not in the society system. Second, moreover, understanding how society runs, what a democratic society is, what rules there are. Because they themselves did not abide to the rules in the first place, they lack this kind of knowledge needed to be a mature citizen of a democratic society. Moreover, most importantly, as the closing team mentioned, these prisoners do not care. They have high possibility of not caring about the result of the voting. They fail to prove how every one of them will care about that, especially prisoners who stay in the prison for a long time, because they will not be not go into the society in a short time. They don't really care because they are not mature citizens. So this will result to even bigger harm for the society. Last class, benefit harm. They talked about social rehabilitation. The Prime Minister, Deputy Minister, and member of government repeated the importance of social rehabilitation. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition team is not ignoring the importance of social rehabilitation. We believe that prisoners should be rehabilitated. However, the importance is social rehabilitation does not include voting. It is different because, as we have proved, voting has much more influence, direct influence on the system itself. Government only looked at the prisoner's view. They did not look at the system's perspective, or moreover, the civilians who are in the system, whose rights will also be infringed if prisoners have a bad effect on choosing the right policies or the adequate leaders for the society. Ladies and gentlemen, because in today's debate, we had a government team who ignored the difference between voting or just individual rights, who ignored the significance that voting has on this social system, which I believe that the opposition team successfully proved to you. Therefore, we oppose this motion. Thank you.
Speaker has spoken for 7 minutes and 15 seconds.
I thank all of the